Hey guys, so as promised, here is the lecture on the persuasive speech. It's about 25-30 minutes long, so it's really important that you watch the whole thing, and at the end there'll be some directions on what you need to do before next class. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to kick me an email. I'll be checking my email over break, so if there is anything that pops up or anything that's not quite clear, by all means, send me a message. I'd be glad to clarify. Alright, hope you enjoy the lecture, and good luck. The persuasive speech. The goal of the following presentation is to give you the information that you need to know to write and prepare to perform the persuasive speech for this class. While this presentation will go into detail on different facets of the persuasive speech, I do encourage you to look over the material available in your course packet, as some areas are spelled out in more detail there. Overview. So briefly before we get into it, I'd like to basically go over the general requirements of the speech and that's going to be covered in the following presentation. First, I'm going to give you the basic requirements of the speech. After that, we'll take a look at what you need to do to develop your content. Unlike some of the speeches that we've done in the past, this speech is the most heavily focused on the content of your speech, which means that you're going to have to do a lot of research. So we're going to spend a little time focusing on that specifically. After that, we'll start to look at the different sections of the speech, starting with the introduction, moving into the problems, causes, and solutions, and finally going over some ways that you can finish strong in your conclusion. After that, I'll give you a couple general tips to be successful in your speech. All right, let's move on. So, the basic requirements of the speech. The persuasive speech is unique from the other material that we did in this class in that it's extremely important that you choose a controversial issue. Now, in some of the informative speeches that we saw, people chose topics that were interesting but not necessarily controversial. Your goal here is to come into a class of a mixed audience and try to persuade that audience to take action. In order for this to be effective, the action that you are trying to get them to take needs to be on an issue that's significantly controversial, as members of your audience may not want to initially take your advice, thus allowing you to use your abilities to persuade to move their will into doing so. So it's important when you're coming up with the topic to make sure it's controversial. If you're not sure if your topic fits this, by all means, feel free to run your topic by me and ask me for feedback, and I will give you a yay or nay on that. Moving on, as I mentioned before, content's going to be important, and we're going to go over that in more detail in a moment, but it is key that when you're doing your research that you have at least 4 high-quality outside sources. Now, I want to add a little disclaimer. In the past, students that have gone higher on that, having somewhere in the range between 6 to 8 sources, are the students that have typically done better. So keep that in mind. Other basic requirements is that you need to make sure that you show both sides of the issue. When you look at the rubric for this speech, you'll notice that one of the main chunks is the requirement for refutation. The way that you do that is by showing reasons why your proposed solution hasn't been enacted, and then refuting those reasons, and then trying to persuade your audience to enact different things that will allow those to come to be. So remember that while persuasive, don't just give a one-sided speech, because if your speech is completely one-sided and doesn't provide refutation, it's going to hurt you and your grade. Finally, this is the last major speaking assignment of the semester. We still have the impromptu after this, but this is kind of the speech that everything has been building up to. At this point, you've given item speeches, you've given storytelling speeches, and you've given informative speeches. At this point, you've gone over the style and delivery a lot. Thus, it's really important that everything that you've learned is demonstrated in this speech. I'm going to be grading very stringently on the different areas of the delivery style. So review that, look at your past rubrics, look at your past videos, and try to find ways that you can improve and have a very excellent style and delivery. And the last of the basic requirements is this speech needs to fall somewhere within the 7-minute range in the 9-minute range. Like in the past, if you go over about 9.5 minutes, I'm going to cut you off. And if you're anywhere under 7 minutes, you're going to lose significant points. So practice, 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 time yourself beforehand, and make sure you fall into that time range. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the requirements of content. So one of the things that sets persuasive speeches apart from other types of speeches is the main goal here is that you make and support claims. This also means that you're going to be making and supporting arguments. So as opposed to the informative where you've just presented information, here you are actively making arguments and advocating on the claims that you're making. As I mentioned before, you need to make sure that you also present the arguments from the other side. So any action that you're going to present that's controversial is going to have people out there that are saying that it is a bad idea. You need to give us those arguments, and you need to make sure that you present them strongly and accurately, and then you need to refute those arguments in order to get full credits. One of the things that I see happen a lot when students give speeches like this and they try to present arguments to the other side is they strawman the argument, and they make the argument seem really weak and don't adequately address it. You don't want to do that. Let the other side's arguments be strong, and then make equally strong arguments as to why your action and your point of view is correct in this situation. Some ways that you can do that is making well-reasoned arguments. Avoid all the different types of fallacies that are demonstrated in more detail inside your textbook. Another way that you can do that is utilizing Toulmin's argument model. By having well-structured arguments is going to set you up for success. So I recommend that you follow that, and in the past students that have stuck to that more stringently are the ones that have done better. While you're making arguments and you're building the content section of your speech, it's important that you supplement that with a wide variety of evidence. Now, as you saw in the last speech, some of you guys, even after my constant discussion of this, used poor quality sources. That is going to hurt you even more so in a persuasive speech. So when you're doing your research, you want to make sure that you have those academic sources to back up your claims. Remember, the whole point here is to make strong arguments. And one of the keys to making strong arguments is providing evidence that supports those arguments. And the best things to look for when looking for pieces of evidence to do that are things that come out of academic journals, government statistics, and testimony from experts in the topic area. A quick aside on that, another problem that I saw in the informatives is that people would give expert testimony, but they would just say, according to Dr. So-and-so, and not provide any credentials to that person. If you're going to bring in some expert testimony, you're going to bring in a person that is a subject expert, you need to explain us why they're credible. We need to know what university they're from, what they have done, what their accolades are in the past. This builds up the expertness of that testimony to your audience and thus makes those good sources. And finally, the content section is worth over half of the points in the speech. Out of 150 points, 80 of those points go into content. So it's really important that you do the research and that you demonstrate that by supporting your arguments in the speech with good evidence. All right, now that we've talked about the generalities of speech, let's go ahead and get into the dirt of this and talk about the different sections. So the persuasive speech is similar to speeches in the past, and there's the three main chunks, that being the problem, causes, and solutions. However, unlike the informative speech, those three chunks are a little more specific, and we'll get into that. But just like you have in the past, you want to still make sure that you have those introductory and conclusionary sections, and we'll talk about that right now. All right, so just like you did in the informative speech, you want to have a solid introduction to set the stage for the speech. The first thing you should do when you get up on stage is start with an attention getter. Avoid saying, "Hi, my name is so-and-so." You don't want to do that because immediately if you start out with, "Hi, my name is so-and-so," you're going to start to lose your audience. It's better to come out strong. Give us an attention getter. Tell us a story. Give us a startling statistic, an anecdote, something that relates to your topic and really grabs the attention. And do it with a lot of energy and connection to your audience, because if you don't do that, you're going to lose us, and it's not going to set a good stage for you being able to persuade us later on. After you've done that, you want to give us some credibility, a credibility statement more specifically, as to why we should listen to you on this topic. Things that you guys have done in the past, such as talking about your research and personal connections to this, are probably some of the strongest things you can do. After that, you should have some sort of connection early on in your introduction to your audience. Ways to do this are through the asking of rhetorical questions, or even better, telling your audience right then and there through a statement or two why this information is important to them. Again, audience adaptation and audience connection are things that you should tie in throughout the course of your speech, especially in a persuasive speech, but it's good to go ahead and have a specific statement built into your introduction to do that early on. After that, it's time to move into your thesis statement and then into your preview. Now, this was a confusing point to some people in the informative, so I really want to hammer this in. The thesis statement of a speech is where you tell your audience specifically what you're here to do. So in the informatives, most of you got up and your thesis statement was or should have been, I am here to inform you about this. In a persuasive speech, it becomes even more specific and more critical. In a persuasive speech, your goal is to persuade your audience to take some sort of an action. And so you need to specifically state that early on in your speech so that your audience is aware of what it is that you're going to try to persuade them to do. So you should be direct and specific. I am here to persuade you to do this. And I'm going to do that through, this is where your preview comes in, showing you the problems of, the causes of, and the solutions to XYZ problem. So as you can see, a couple things there. One, you specifically tell us what your thesis statement is, what you're here to do, and you lay out the 3 sections of the body of your speech, which we're going to get into now. All right. As I mentioned, there are 3 chunks to a persuasive speech body: the problems, the causes, and the solutions, also known to some as the harms, the inherency, and the solvency. So let's go ahead and dig into those and talk a little bit more about that. All right, so the first main point, the problems. You want to start out this section of your speech, this main point, by giving us a description of the problem. And this can be one of the first places that you start to bring in some of the research that you've done. So lay out, step by step in subpoints, some of the signs of the problems, symptoms, the effects outwardly of the problems. This can also be a good place to give us some examples. A lot of times when you're laying out a big chunk of statistics or problem or causal scenarios, it can be kind of hard for your audience to connect to that. So some of the things that you can do at this point is to tell a story indicative of those problems, or to provide some witness testimony that kind of gives more of a human connection to your audience as to how those problems are impacting human beings throughout the world. After you've done that, you need to make arguments as to why this problem is important. Some ways that you can do this is you can lay out the extent of the problem. Again, another good place to bring facts or statistics in. Just remember that you want to support those and give me a source, both in text in your outline and verbally during your speech, as to where those facts and statistics come from. And this is another place that you can give expert testimony as long as you establish the credibility of said expert. After you talked about the extent, it's good to lay out who is affected by this problem. So again, bring in those facts and statistics, expert testimony, and tell us specifically who this problem impacts. Again, specific examples here can be critical to making some connection to your audience. The final point here is that you need to lay out the consequences or the impacts of your problem. Some things that are useful when laying out those impacts, in addition to providing expert testimony and examples, is to talk about it on different levels. So there might be large, overreaching societal issues that are important, that are impacted by this problem, but there might be more specific, nuanced examples of how these impacts hit people on a personal level. So it might be good to split those up, talk about the big issues, and then talk about the more personal issues to really hit it home. All right, so we can go ahead and move on. I do want to add as just a brief subnote, it is okay to talk about multiple problems in your problem section. So you can do these things, but there might be different aspects of the problem that you can talk about. So you could literally, go into your main point, talk about, major problem number one, go through the whole description of the problem, importance of the problem, consequence of the problem, and then say, okay, then there's the second major problem that's related to this issue, and do the same thing. That's completely fine, though in a speech of this length, I wouldn't really go over 2, maybe 3, but you should check with me first before you do that in the problem section. All right, now that we've talked about that, let's talk about the causes section. So the second main point in a persuasive speech, known as the cause, or to some, the inherency of the problem, is a point of your speech where you explain why the problem is happening and is allowed to continue to happen. So this section should start off as a statement of what is causing the problem. You should bring in evidence here, and you should link that evidence back to the problem. So give an actual example as to this thing that causes the problem and why it is not being fixed. Once you've done that, you should then talk about how the cause of the problem can be overcome. And this section of the speech needs to be solution directed, and I'll explain that a little bit better. So first thing you want to do is talk about how the cause is being handled currently. So if there are problems that exist out in the world, chances are there is current plans to fix those problems, or at least a status quo as to how those problems are being dealt with. You should talk about that, right? And then once you've done that, you need to explain to us, your audience, why whatever is happening in the status quo is an inadequate solution or way to deal with that problem. And again, bring in examples of this. And then finally, you need to start to hint at and explain some of the different ways that that problem might be handled differently. Ultimately, the point of the cause section is to give us these reasoning examples of how the problem happens right now and why whatever is happening right now sucks and can be done better. Point out this is the point of your speech where you present the arguments from the other side as to why things are being handled like that, and you tear those down. So this is one of the key points of your speech where you present counter arguments and refute those. There's going to be another place after you present your plan, but this is the key first place it happens. So you want to make sure that you do that, and also using language such as, one of the counter proposals to this is this, however it can be refuted by, and that'll hint to me as I'm listening to your speech that you're giving me counter-refutation, and I can mark it on your rubric. Again, the easier that you make it for me, ultimately, the better it's going to be for your grade. All right, let's move on to the last main point of the body of the speech, the solution. So up until this point, you have demonstrated that there are problems out in the world. And you've explained to me what those problems are and who they impact. You've then told me the causes of those problems and how there might be stuff happening right now, but that stuff sucks, and there are better ways that can be going about this. Now, in this final point of the speech, your goal is to present a solution to said problems that overcomes whatever the causes are and can actually provide some solution and some fixes. The way you go about that in the third main point is by first providing a description of your solution. So it's up to you at this point to write out a plan. This is how you can solve this problem. And I want you to lay that out in this first part of the third main point as to what that solution is. And you need to make arguments as to why that solution fits the problem, and you should give an example of that. The second section of the third point is you need to explain to us how the solution can actually be put into place. This is where the text of your plan comes out. And you should very neatly and in a very organized fashion give us a step-by-step account as to what it would take to put your plan into place. So if there are multiple branches of government that have to do things, if there are multiple fiscal issues that have to happen, you need to lay those out. And related to that, you need to tell us specifically how much it's going to cost and what efforts it's going to take by who to bring that into place. Once you've done that, you need to picture the results for this. This means that you need to tell us what would happen, theoretically, if your plan was to be put into action. So some of the ways that you can do this is to describe what would happen after the fact, and you need to give us a timeline or a bright line as to when your audience could technically to see those things come into place. And again, you can talk to us about how long it would take for this to happen, and then when we can expect results. And this is also a point of your speech where you can talk about some additional benefits. So sometimes taking an action to solve a problem might garner additional independent advantages, and it's great at this point to kind of throw those on there to kind of sweeten the deal. Now, once you've done this, you get to this final point, and this can be the most critical point in success or failure in a persuasive speech, is that you need to call your audience to action. This means that you need to tell us specifically what we can do to bring your plan into effect. All right? So, a couple ways you can do this. First, tell us what we can do on a big solution level. This can be things like, you need to contact a congressman. You need to, go out and spread awareness in different aspects. All great. Big kind of status quo things. Awesome. But it's also important to bring this onto a more personal level. I'll give an example. In a past class, I had a theme that was more related to rights, and one of my students gave a speech that you needed to get more involved in the political process. You need to do this by voting. And one of the things that they did is they came in with a stack of voter registration forms. They asked the audience who was registered to vote and who wasn't, and then the goal of their speech was to get the people that weren't registered to vote to register right then and there, so that they took it and brought it, and then they got the people that were registered to take 3 and sign a pledge that they would actually go out that day and try to register 3 people to vote. Very specific call to actions that were achievable and attainable on a personal level. Ultimately, the more creative you get with your call to action, the better your grade will be. If you just give me the standards, so like write your congressman or whatnot, okay, I'll mark that you did it, but you're definitely not getting better to a C in that category. So be creative on your call to actions, and again, feel free to run ideas by me, and I can give you an idea as to whether or not they're good ideas or if there's something more creative you can do. So I definitely encourage that. All right, so at this point, you have given the problem, causes, and solutions of your speech, and you're ready to move into your conclusion. So, just like you have in the past speech, the first thing that you want to do in your conclusion is reassert and reinforce the reason that you're there today. So, again, this is a persuasive speech. You were there to persuade your audience to do something, so you need to tell us that. Excuse me. So, start off your conclusion after a break light is to kind of summarize and reinforce your thesis. So, today I told you why you need to take this action to solve this problem. And then at that point, you want to summarize your main points. And again, this should kind of mirror your preview. I told you about the problems of this. I told you what specifically was causing this. And finally, I gave you a real world solution and gave you the tools and the information that you needed to put that solution into action. Then the very final part that you need to make sure that you get to is to close effectively. And to do this, finish with style. This part of your speech should very closely mirror the attention getter in that it should be stylistic. You can finish with a quote, you can finish with a story, though the better speeches that I've done is they've used a method that some call the story sandwich, where you tell part of a story in the attention getter, give your speech, and then come back to that story and kind of finish that story at the end in a stylistic way that you wouldn't be able to do without having known the content of your speech. So story sandwiches are a great way to do that. All right, so that makes up the body of what you need to do in this speech. Now, I'm just going to briefly give you a couple tips, and then we'll move on to what you need to do before the next class. First tip is make sure that you use the template to write your outline. There's a few of you in the informative that didn't use the template, and I imagine that you weren't too happy with your grades because you were missing sections and you didn't do things. The template that I've created for you guys for this speech is very structured, and it will make it easy for you guys to make sure that you have all the correct components. So use that template. There's a lot to it in there, and I think you'll be happy. The other side note on that is please pay close attention to APA format. There were multiple significant issues and the informative outlines of people not adhering to APA format. When in doubt, pop over to the library and take a peek at the APA publication manual. It has things spelled out in depth. I am using the 6th edition, the most recent edition APA format, and since this is the last major writing, we still have that speaking in public thing hanging out there, but this is one of the last major writing assignments that involves research of the semester. I'm going to be very, very strict on grading for APA format, so make sure that you get it right. All right, and then the last thing is you want to make sure that the speech is interesting to your audience. Don't pick a dull topic. If you bore your audience, you're very unlikely to be able to persuade them to do anything. If people are nodding off and falling asleep, it's not going to be good. So find something that's interesting to you and that you think is going to be interesting to this audience, and then use that extemporaneous delivery style to make sure that that sticks throughout the speech. All right, so a couple things that you need to do before next class. First off, I'm assuming that most of you watched this on the actual YouTube page. So if you look directly below this speech, down there somewhere, there should be a comment box that looks a bit like this. What you need to do is, in that comment box, leave a comment that mirrors this. It should have your full name, your full name, topic, and you need to give me the specific topic. So in my example here, I chose Arizona Senate Bill 1070, and then you need to give me what your thesis statement is to be. So my example was, I will persuade you to take action to repeal Arizona's immigration law. If I don't have all those three things, it's not going to count, and it's not going to be good. The other thing that I want to point out is I don't want topic duplication. So if somebody before you has already selected the topic that you wanted, you need to go do a little research and find something different to cover. We want to have a variety of topics covered here, and having the same thing won't necessarily work. Now, there is one caveat to that. If, for example, someone had chosen to do my topic, I will persuade you to take action to repeal Arizona's immigration law, I will allow a second person at that point to choose that same topic. If they were choosing to take it from the other side, so the affirmative side, I will persuade you to take action to ensure that Arizona's immigration laws and other laws like it stay in place. I'm fine as long as it's the complete opposite side of the issue, and I'll probably schedule you guys to go on to the same day. But other than that, I want you guys to pick significantly different topics. That way we get a wide variety of issues and we don't hear the same stuff over and over again. So again, in the comment section below this YouTube video, I need your full name, your topic, and your thesis statement. And it's first come to first serve, so please make sure that you look at the comments that were given in the past and make sure yours is unique, and things will be good. All right. Then the last thing is, I know it's middle of spring break right now, but the Wednesday that we get back, draft of your, and that should say persuasive, shame on me, your persuasive drafts are due. You need to make sure that you upload those drafts to Vista before the next class period, but also bring a hard copy so that we can do a little workshopping in class on the day that we go over persuasive tactics. So upload those drafts to Vista in the Dropbox, bring a hard copy to class, and we should be looking good. All right, this concludes the lecture on the persuasive speech. If you have any questions for me, feel free to kick me an email or message me on Vista. I will be checking email over break, and I'd be glad to get back to you with any questions or specifics that you need to do. So, hope you guys enjoy the rest of your break, and I will see you the Wednesday that we come back. Thank you.